we're in Michigan this week, and we are well into habitat season. And there is three things that have, to me, that always resonate to this time of the year. And that is, we always talk about its habitat improvements. What is the improvement? How does that connect to what you're doing? What's the turnout of it? You know, did you look at what your fails and successes were last year? Did you bring that forward into this year? And there's always three, to me, that stand out. So three habitat improvements. The issue is that fail. It's always a consistency throughout from year to year to year that I see that these improvements, these three improvements, and there's many of them, but these are the three biggest that I see that are pretty repetitive, that the three biggest improvements that fail. So what we're going to start with is this. To me, as an improvement, in any improvement, whether you're talking an improvement on your land, improvement to your life, improvement to your relationship, it's really not an improvement unless it worked, right? So there's a lot of things that attach to that with habitat that you can say that, hey, I see a lot of folks getting awards through the certain associations. I won't name any, but certain associations give out awards for somebody that planted the most trees, somebody that that's connected through conservation somehow. And you have to look deeper into that sometimes. Is there, like I said, if the improvement was a success, then it deserves a pat on the back. But if your improvement failed, there's something that can be learned from that and should be learned from it, so you don't recreate or you don't do that time and time and time again. Because every time that you do that, obviously it sets your success on your properties. It sets that timeline, just it keeps setting it back. So the first thing, so that's the first thing that we're going to touch on is, success really isn't the success unless it has a powerful outcome on your property that's giving you that, return on investment, like we say through deer hunting. Whether that's making sure that what you have done is really connecting to the deer themselves, making sure that you're not, planting certain areas, or you're not doing certain things that are going to, like in the UP of Michigan, for example, that the deer herd has a very small window to try to, and this goes across the country as well. Any northern climate, Wisconsin, you guys can relate to this. Minnesota, you guys can relate to this. Canada, I've got viewers tuning in from Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, and that to me is the biggest thing. Is if you are, there's no success that comes with creating spots that interrupts a deer yard where you can keep deer in a certain area, and you end up killing the majority of the deer herd. That maybe not your entire deer herd, but the deer herd that stays around your local communities, your local farms, is because you interrupted that cycle. So the moral of that is if you're going to go and do habitat improvements, make sure it fits your region, make sure it fits your area, and by all means, if you're going to do habitat improvements, do it 110%. Don't do the improvement that's just enough to keep deer in a certain area that you're going to get them into trouble, like in them cold regions, or just simply it's a waste of time. You don't have enough of it to really influence the herd. Let's be honest. We're doing this to help. We should be doing this to not only help our deer hunt, like I've said in the past, but also to help the deer health or the herd in general. And if you're not doing that, and if it's all focused towards hunting, it really wasn't a success. So number one that we're going to talk of here on the list, number one, one of the biggest things I see is the hinge cutting and bedding areas, hinge cutting in general. It's a very powerful tool. We've said this time and time again. I'll probably say it 1,000 more times. Hinge cutting is a very powerful tool. The problem with hinge cutting is there's a couple of, like we have talked in the past, a couple of myths. The high hinge cuts. When to hinge cut, when not to hinge cut, so let's touch on that for a minute. High hinge cuts, guys, is something that I feel very strongly about. There are time and time again multiple properties that I'm on a year that I could show you, I could prove to you that high hinge cuts just don't work. And to me, it's not the fact that you hear a lot of this debate, is it high hinge cuts? Do the deer really like to get under them? Are you really gaining anything by putting them low? To me, it's two things that stand out. One, I'm not here to tell you that a deer won't bed under a canopy, because they will. I've seen deer bed under canopies. I went to farms that there are beds under canopies. The problem with it is this. I look at the not so much, will some deer do it? I kind of look at a majority, but to me, I'm focused on what are you actually gaining by not doing a high hinge cut. And to me, and the number one thing is the safety. You just, folks that don't run a saw all the time, or I've been, blessed enough to be brought up with a saw, and, we used to do that. We used to select cut after we got done, excavating for the year. We would select cut a couple hundred acres for the Forest Service. So, that was the day, yes, we had an iron mule, but we had saws. You laid the trees down on the ground by the saws. We were bucking up the limbs and the whole deal. So you really get, as a young age, I really got familiar with that. And I've got Carhartts to show you that I still have screwed up and, darn near cut my leg off at times. So having the saw at your face or at head level is just a huge risk that doesn't need to happen. That's the number one thing. So on our side of it, the human side of it, it doesn't help you, it doesn't help the deer if you're injured, if you can't be out there. So the second thing of that is the high hinge cuts just create this, it takes your available browse out of the reach of the deer. So it's not, like I said, guys, it's not to me that whether they will bed under it or not. I think that point has been proven. That's my belief. I don't think that they do as much bed underneath it. They don't want the canopy. They don't need the canopy. They need the side cover, but we need to get that deer, or we need to get that level of browse down at the deer's head level, so they can obviously use it. So the entire time that you cut those low, that entire trunk, all them shoots, that are growing off from that trunk, the top of the tree, all them stump jumps that you hear me speak of, all that stuff is at reachable heights. And if you don't do that, you're wasting, the majority. Let's just use round numbers. Let's say a 60-foot tree, and you go 6 foot in the air with your hinge cuts. Well, easy math shows you that you're wasting 10% of the tree. So to me, it's not. I'd rather see you leave the tree standing than do a high hinge cut and not serve the purpose of feeding the deer. So that's my belief. That's what I see on properties. That's what I teach. You might have a different opinion, but that's, to me, those are the two things that kind of prove that reason. That's why hinge cutting fails. The last thing that we'll talk about there on the hinge cutting side of it is, to me, whether you have high hinge cuts, low hinge cuts, not enough hinge cuts, what I see the most of is this. I see the reason that they fail, whether you're in buck bedding, especially doe bedding areas, is it's the ever so popular topic that I use, the phrase I use, the tornado effect. But that's why I do my hub style bedding. You don't have to do the hub style. You can do a kind of amazing pocket effect, but if you do one thing for yourself during habitat season, don't create a tornado effect inside of a bedding area where you just go in and you pick a spot along the food plot, hopefully for your doe bedding, and you start dropping trees, and after it's all dropped down, then you go in and you start carving these corridors out, and you start cutting the ends of the trees off because you need to, it's a maze, you can't get them through there. Well, the fact of the matter is, at that point, it's the same theory as high hinge cuts. You're destroying what you're creating. So at that point, don't create it at all. So it's really not a success, right? So if you don't take anything from any of the videos I ever teach, take that into consideration. Don't cut the trees down. Don't use your good hingeable trees that you're really trying to get the success part, not fail at a habitat improvement. Don't make a tornado effect out of your bedding areas, guys. That's probably the biggest thing that I see, that as far as a property to property, week to week, that I can say that's the biggest issue that I see in general is tornado bedding effects. So take that into consideration. So number 2, depending on your region, summer food plots in general, but the biggest fail that I see is summer food plots. I don't find as many fails on fall food plots because the deer are actually utilizing the food that you plant when they need it. Now, do I see a bunch of fall food plots that don't perform and don't kind of run out before? Soybeans not being planted in large enough areas. Soybeans are a great tool, but there's nothing left of them. Do I see brassicas that didn't grow because your pH or your organic matter isn't correct? Yes, I do. But to me, that's not as much of a fail, because you're actually trying to give the deer something to have that time of the year to get them through. And that goes for all over the deer range. That's just not in the the Midwest and the North and Northeast here. That's kind of a rule of thumb. If you're focused on fall food, then you're focused on helping the health of the herd. Now, your property might be one of those properties that you can have summer and fall food, and that's great. But you have to make that determination ahead of time, and that's why I see that summer food plots are the biggest failure as far as an improvement that really didn't improve anything, because what you're doing is those summer food plots are very specific to the region. You have to be, one of the regions that stand out here to me is the UP of Michigan, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, northern Wisconsin, some of the Northeast up in Vermont, Maine. Some of these areas where lower deer numbers prevail, and you're trying to help the deer recover from a harsh winter. Those are areas that you're actually improving the areas and having a success, instead of wasting money and it's just a fail. And the reason for that is, one thing to really watch on this, guys, with that though, one thing is to really watch. So there's always a pro and a con to everything, right? One of the pros in that area, like we talked, in those regions, or any region around the country that you're tuning in, some of the western regions, is if your deer numbers are low, summer food plots can really help your property. But you have to take this into consideration. Usually, for whatever reason this is, a lot of it's got to do with region, but one thing that I see with summer food plots is that I'm very, very cautious about, that I have off the top of my head. I think I've got probably a dozen clients this year. If you're watching, obviously you're going to relate to this, but there's a connection that summer food plots can get you into major trouble. And why is that? And this is the issue right here: predators. You're creating, we do everything as conservationists, as habitat managers, as deer hunters, all across the whitetail range. We do whatever we can do not to enhance the predator aspect of a farm. And then when you plant summer food plots in those regions where your wolves, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, where your wolves are out of control, that really can affect your herd. So you are failing, because you're setting the herd up for failure. So anytime that you put more of those deer in those areas where there's fawning taking place, and if you're familiar with coyotes, you'll know very quickly that you put more fawns in fawning areas, then your coyote numbers is high. Now take that and times it by about 10 with the wolf population out there in these areas, northern Michigan, northern Wisconsin, and they can be seriously destructive. Well, you go out west into those western deer regions like we're talking about, you plant summer food plots, or they enhance the like northeastern Wyoming, for example, and the red rim rock areas, and you plant them draws, and you come off a summer or a winter feeding program, and those does don't go very far, them resident does. But now you start feeding them again, and you don't let them go out into those alfalfa fields that are predominant out there. Now you've got wolves out there, and now you're only not only affecting the whitetail herd, you're affecting the elk herd. So there's a lot to be said for that you really should dig deep in with summer food plots. The majority of the country, contrary to belief, the majority of the country, you do not need summer food plots. Now, if you are lucky enough to have ag on your property, then yes, it's larger amounts, and you're setting that, you're promoting some lines of travel, you're getting some deer accustomed to your property. All that ties into it. You have a power where you're sending deer, where you can send deer to after they leave your food plots in the fall. All that ties into it. But summer food plots, just summer food plots, most of the time it's either too high deer numbers and they're going to fail. There's going to be nothing left going into the fall when they really need it. And the next thing that you tie into that is creating a predator trap. So to me, in the high deer numbers, you really have to research: is it worth planting clover? I see this all the time, and this is something that just boggles my mind. Clover is very, very expensive. It's very hard to maintain, but folks will plant it in the summer. So two things with clover: one, folks will plant it in the spring, and then they'll disc it up in the fall. And to me, it's like, that's not the, the idea. That is a perennial. It's supposed to, you could get 3, 4, 5 years out of a great clover plot, and you're tilling it under. Well, yes, it's got some nitrogen aspects of it, and it builds soil, but there's way better ways to get there. So you're not really doing anything, you're going backwards on that. So that's one of the fails. So the biggest thing to me, like I said, guys, is just taking that into consideration about making sure you're not building these predator traps. And if you had some open ears, I actually heard this when I was in Wisconsin 3 weeks ago. Driving down the road, I was in Wisconsin, and that was the day that they had actually reached their quota for the wolf hunt. And so they harvested 82 wolves in 39 hours. So let that sink in. 82 wolves in 39 hours. They filled their quota, and they were 50% over their quota. So the government or the state only wanted to kill 41, and they killed 82. So in 39 hours. So I'm here to tell you, if that doesn't spook you, and if that doesn't really, that should resonate with all the Michigan folks that are tuning in. That should resonate with everybody that's watching this. Do we really want to plant summer food plots? Because you are in danger of really enhancing that disturbance that's up there. It's a huge issue, and if that, like I said, if you can kill 82 wolves in 39 hours, there's a problem. So the third thing that we're going to touch on here is one of the improvements that I see that folks try to do that ends up failing, and this is one here that I am just as guilty of as well. There's a lot of us out there, guys, that are guys and gals that are tuning into this. There's a lot of us out there that just don't have those green thumbs that everybody speaks of. And tree planting and shrub planting, so trees as far as apples, fruit trees, your persimmons, your walnut, anything that you hear that is just this big fad out there that everybody's planting. And don't get me wrong, if you have the money to spend on tree planting, extra tree planting on your property, it's a huge deal. It can be a huge success. The problem with it is, I would really encourage you, and I do my best to teach folks, but I would really encourage you to reach out to someone such as different than myself, or like I said, the fruit tree thing. I've got a pretty good handle on that over the years. But your shrubs, like last year, I've actually got to do an update on that now that the snow's pretty much gone here. I've got to go down. You've seen that we've transplanted those red osier dogwoods. I've done that in the past. I haven't done that to this area, so I'm going to go down and kind of see how it went. But I've got a feeling that we probably put 100 of them in the ground on the end of our plot here. And what I could see in the fall, because I didn't go down there, what I was seeing from the fall from like 100 yards is there wasn't anything left of them. So is it a complete fail? I believe that unless they took off, unless they didn't kill them, yes, it was a complete fail. So you got to look at that as what can I do, better to really enhance that going into this year. Can I plant 100 more, or did those 100 make it? They didn't eat them all the way to the ground. But that red osier dogwood is like deer candy, right? So the trees themselves, the apple trees, I see a lot of folks around the country failing, wasting a lot of money, is because you're not properly keeping the deer away from them. Some folks are putting there's all kinds of things that happen. Some folks are putting the cages too tight to the tree. Some folks leave the cage on too long. There's the mice. A lot of parts of the country don't have to deal with this, but in a snow belt region or snow area, you have to worry about the mice using the snow to get in and tunneling in, and girdling the tree. So they're tricky. I'm not going to lie to you. That whole tree planting thing is very tricky. So whether you're transplanting or whether you're doing that, and I guess the biggest thing that I teach is, this goes back to something that I learned from my grandfather years ago, is you never transplant a tree other than in a month with an R in it. So April, for example, you don't do anything in May. You can do it in March, you can do it in April. Don't do anything in May. So that's kind of something I've learned to run with, and believe it or not, that's one of those those old farmer's tales, if you will, that we can all learn from. One thing is like pruning the trees. I went to some spots where a couple of years ago, for whatever reason, this big boom happened about pruning your trees, and it's a huge deal. But that's one of the things too. There is, I would reach out to somebody with an orchard to really figure out what tree you have, as far as pruning these, what trees, your limbs you should be cutting, because I went to some places where, the tree is now 10 years old and the folks are trimming it thinking that they're doing an improvement, and they have destroyed the tree because now you've taken 50% of the production value out of the tree because you trimmed the wrong limbs. So to me, I keep it real simple. I let the larger limbs live, unless it's obviously a big dead limb, then obviously we cut it out. But to me, I trim the smaller dead stuff off from it and then just let that tree go. Now, to me though, I'm doing it on a small portion. I've got a dozen trees over the course of the year here that I prune, and once in a while, when we're picking up the new property here, I'll be putting some more fresh trees in. But that's one of them things that just I see that time and time again, whether it's pine tree plantings, planting fruit trees is one thing, but a shrub or a pine tree, let's say, planting spruce. I see folks doing row spruce, and so we're going to do a video here on this, coming up. So I won't go into great detail with this, but where do you plant the spruce? How do you plant them? What do you do? I mean, are you really gaining anything by planting 1,000 spruce in rows, not on your fence row, but in rows on your property, to think that you're thickening up an area to create bedding? Are you really gaining what you think you're gaining? And the answer to that is no. So there's a lot of these things in here, guys, and to me, I've learned this whole thing, and I still learn all the time. That old school of hard knocks. But these are three things that I think that we can all relate to. And the biggest thing here is no matter how you put these in order, if you want to add something to this, take one of these away, whatever the case is, just look at that as an improvement. I really I do this all the time. I've got some videos that talk about this. Going back, looking at the past, using your field notes. And I'm a real big believer on that, because if whether that's in a hunting situation or a habitat, trying to improve that area, if it didn't work last year, it's not going to work this year. So there's a time to change that. And if you have to reach out to people, each one of us have our own place in this world, whether it's in the hunting industry, whether it's in the fruit trees industry, whether it's in being an arborist, whatever the case is, we all have our lane to stay in, right? So to me, I don't have a problem reaching out to someone that is a professional in their industry, and that's what I think the connection is here. Is a lot of folks just think that this is a simple game, and you can do these improvements, and time and time again, it doesn't end up as an improvement because it's not a success. It fails, and you're not doing the deer herd any benefits by doing that. So I really encourage you to look to see if it was an improvement or a failure, and take that knowledge into this year. To go into this year with a new mindset, with a new strategy, with some new information that you've reached out there to someone that, like I said, a professional in the industry that you're looking at, whether that's the tree industry, the food plot industry, or the ag in general, and your plantings, and then your tree and shrub. Go to those people, reach out to them, really study that, because like I said, there's a lot of it here that we wait all year. It's like, you get out of deer season, you wait all year to go into habitat season, and then when deer season rolls around, or this time next year rolls around, we didn't gain anything. So it's just that's why small parcels just never reach their full potential, because we're always working on certain things are failing, and you're adding to it, and it's never working. So really research what worked, what didn't, and then take that knowledge into this year, guys, and I think you'll have a way better outcome.